Welcome to the Authentic Life Connection podcast. I'm your host, Seth. I'm a master certified life coach, author, personal trainer, and nutrition specialist. For over a decade, I've been helping people with their dreams and goals for their life and health. I spent many years watching people get frustrated with their journey in life and giving up on taking actions towards their goals. So I dug in deep to find answers to why so many of us face this same frustration and struggle in life. So in this podcast, we're going to dive in deep on topics surrounding what it means to consistently live a fulfilling and authentic life, where you are unstoppable in taking action towards your dreams and goals. So the only question is, are you ready to start living your most authentic and fulfilling life once and for all? Then let's get started, shall we? Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. For those of you joining in for the first time, welcome. You picked a great episode to join in on for the first time, and it's an exciting episode because I'm bringing a guest on this week. I don't get to bring guests on so often, but I'm working on bringing more guests on for you all and more frequently. And this week, I have a friend of mine from Boston, Massachusetts joining us today. His name is Alex Amorosi, and he is a yoga instructor, Reiki practitioner, and a very fascinating astrologist. So he is going to join us on this episode today to talk about what it truly means to live an authentic lifestyle and how we can look at our own authentic lives and align with what is truly fulfilling for us from an astrological perspective. So I know you guys are going to get a lot out of this conversation today. It was a fun conversation to have. I'm just going to go ahead and get out of the way and let you all get on to listening to my talk with Alex Amorosi. Enjoy.
Hey.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Give me just 1 second here. Okay,
Take your
good.
time. Take your time.
I just, I realized my microphone wasn't plugged in and I just plugged it in. I want to make sure that I'm recording from the right microphone because the one on my laptop sounds horrible if I record from there.
How does my sound sound? Okay.
I think it sounds good. Yeah, we're good.
Very good. Let me see your. Is that a lotus?
It's a new tattoo.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I just got it on Monday of last week, so it's just over a week old, which is why I'm like wearing the open shirt right now because it's still kind of like sensitive right now. Yeah.
Good.
So how are you? I mean, it's been a couple of months since we've talked, actually.
I know. It's been wild, actually. Like really good, but just lots of big changes. I'm in a relationship now, which is really awesome. Like it's been 10 years since I've had an actual like boyfriend. So like it's like that's a big, awesome, amazing shift that's happened. I mean, it was actually starting when we were talking, but like it's like solidified, into a like kind of committed thing now, which is great. Work is good. I'm sort of settling more into, I think, I've gone through a big transition from seeing myself as a pure yoga teacher and yoga teacher trainer to now a sort of spiritual coach and all the stuff that I do around that. So my identity's been shifting around that, but life has generally just been really awesome. Like it's all these things have changed so quickly that it's like, I'm kind of just letting myself ride the wave with it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think for me also this year has been, I'm not making any changes as far as shifting what I do, but how I do it has been like a huge shift this year. Like where I'm still really focused on my the life coaching aspect of my business and really kind of steering away from the personal training and nutrition side of things, even though I still offer that. But my focus this year has been really almost like laser-like. Whereas before this year, it was a bit confused as far as what's my message, what am I really helping people with here. This year, it's been just very laser focused on what I'm really here to do and help people with. And lots of big changes there in how I present my business online and to people, how I talk to people, and my focus with helping my clients, which has been really beneficial for them too, because I started noticing there were some areas where if I could be a bit more focused and intentional, I could offer them a lot more value, and
Sure.
bringing kind of that in. So you're shifting more away from the yoga and more into the spiritual coaching. Are you still incorporating astrology into that though?
Oh, absolutely. Astrology is actually what's growing most for me. But yoga, I taught yoga. I have taught yoga for 20 years, and I used to just purely teach yoga classes and train yoga teachers. And I would always do a little bit of sort of, I'm a Reiki practitioner. I've done Reiki for almost 15 years now. I've always done Reiki and stuff like that, sort of on the side when I was doing yoga. But yeah, I was fascinated by yoga's ability to help me heal
Mm-hmm.
and how it helped me heal. And I'm the biggest how and why person on the planet. Like I'm just like, well, how did my back heal? Like, how did my depression heal? Like, how did that go away just by doing these movements? But I've just organically, especially since 2020, been discovering I'm like, oh, there's a lot that I want to teach people and help people with that shows them more of a, I don't know, like a roadmap to the subtle universe. The part of us we all know is there, but we don't know how to define.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of like been my greatest passion lately because I didn't understand it for a long time, Seth. I knew I had this connection to a subtler part of our senses, or I call multisensory ability that we have as humans. But I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how to control it, and I didn't know how to access it when I wanted to, but also be able to put it down when I wanted to, which is really important. And all of that kind of spiraled into an energetic understanding of the universe, of which astrology is one of the many sort of modalities that I use in
Mm-hmm.
terms of that. Astrology to me is like the meteorology of the energetic or the subtle universe. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I recently actually discovered, are you familiar with a life coach named Christine Hassler?
I'm not, no.
Okay. She's she's I guess what you would call one of my role models as a life coach. Her
Mm.
and Brooke Castillo, I look up to them big time as far as how they coach, their coaching styles. And I look more to Brooke Castillo as she's kind of like the badass that's just unstoppable. And I
Yeah.
look to Christine Hassler as like she's so intuitive and she can like reach into people and find things that I'm like, holy shit, like how did you like? And so I look to these coaches as role models for me as coaches, and she has a friend who lives in Joshua Tree, Arizona, who is an astrologer, and she brings him on her podcast like once a year. And he was talking about astrology in one of her recent episodes that she put out because she had him on, and he was talking about the kind of astrology that he did, and he said it was called Asterian astrology.
Mm.
Are you familiar with this?
I'm not, no, I haven't heard that.
I thought it was really interesting. You might want to check him. I'll send you a link to his
Sure.
website
Yeah.
so you can check it out. Really, he has a really interesting approach to astrology, and it's not so different from yours, but there was like a little bit of contrast there, and I was just kind of like, oh, I need to bring this up to Alex. I wonder if he's heard of this. He'd find this really interesting. So yeah, why don't you tell everyone, because not everyone on here knows who you are at this point in
Big
time.
toe.
Yeah. So just introduce yourself, tell everyone who you are, what you do, and maybe kind of how you came about deciding to choose this as your career path, or it chose you as your career path.
Okay, I'm gonna try to. Whoa, all right. So I'll just start and I'll try to weave it together as best I can. So my name's Alex Amorosi. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I actually grew up, which is really surprising for the work that I do now, as an agnostic, and in my teen years and early 20s was a total atheist, total materialist atheist. And which shocks me even when the work that I do now, I never would have in a thousand million years imagined myself doing it. I grew up as a really sensitive kid. I grew up as a very emotionally sensitive kid, and I didn't know the sort of background of why that was happening. And there was many reasons for it, but there was more that I'll get to in a second about why I was sort of perceiving a lot of information I didn't understand. But basically, when I got into my teen years, I was in such a stressful place in my own mind that I began doing Buddhist meditation. purely to help me with my own anxiety and my own sense of emotional regulation and well-being. Even though I couldn't define it in those terms at that time, that's what I knew it was helping me with. Stumbled into yoga at the age of 24. Was never an athletic person, was always the lanky gay kid in gym class who was totally uncoordinated and just felt so out of place and always being bullied and made fun of. So I didn't want anything to do with anything, athletic or anything like that. But yoga I felt so good after yoga classes, and I couldn't define why I felt good. I just felt amazing. And I had a couple injuries that were kind of chronic. No one could kind of figure out, that began to heal about 6 months after doing yoga. Like, the pain was completely gone. So I got into yoga, and then anything I learned that helps me, I want to learn to teach and help others with it. So I did a yoga teacher training, began teaching yoga. That was only supposed to be like a year break between a corporate job and whatever I was going to do next. Little did I know it turned into a 20-year career that's still going strong. I taught yoga for many years. I trained yoga teachers and still continue to train yoga teachers. I've been doing that since 2007. And I loved it. And I was into it. But yoga was okay for me because it was tangible. It was like, here's my body moving. There are physiological reasons why this is changing the way that I feel. That it's changing my neurology. That it's changing my relationship to myself. But, having done so much meditation, I really began to become aware of, there is a realm or an aspect to my own mind that is more subtle. And I think I've been aware of it my entire life. In fact, I think this leads into why I was such a sensitive kid in a lot of ways. I was perceiving a lot of information that I couldn't understand why or how I was perceiving it. And so I got into Reiki in 2008. And that was, again, just happened into it, as I've happened into so many things in my life. And I did all 3 levels of Reiki, which I did by 2013. And it was probably after I'd done my Reiki Master Attunement in 2013, 2014, where I began to notice, I'm like, oh, we're able as human beings to receive information on an intuitive level, on a level that we can't quite we can't define. Even now it's hard for me to define it, but we just know that we know, or we get impressions, or we get images, or I get a lot of images and felt sensations. So I would do Reiki for people, and I was like, that's cool. And this is, I get this, and this makes sense to me. And it was helpful. And I got into more of my coaching work by doing Reiki, because I talked to people about what I was perceiving while I was doing work with them. And then astrology came along, and that was my last holdout. I'm like, no way, man. Like, I can't go there. I cannot believe that's actually a thing, right? I can understand through meditation and studying, Vajrayana Buddhism and different types of yoga. Yes, there is an aspect to the mind that is more abstract, and that we receive information from many levels in many ways, and that our consciousness doesn't just exist in our brains, but it's a bigger, wider concept. But astrology just didn't make sense to me, because I was like, well, what is Jupiter doing to me, or what is Mars doing to me? That doesn't make sense. But my Reiki teacher, who I deeply respect and is a very good friend of mine, she said to me, astrology is really about cycles. And that got my attention, because I'm like, okay, I can see that the ancients may have understood the cycles of the planets as a correlation to our own experiences as human beings, that the ancient mind saw us as much more connected to the universe than we see ourselves today. We tend to see ourselves separate, apart from, and looking at the universe, rather than sort of participants in it. And then I went and got my actual first astrology reading, a chart reading. And that was pretty mind-blowing. I never would have anticipated that reading would have helped me in the ways that it helps me. And it wasn't because it wasn't a predictive reading. It was helping me to see myself in ways I had not seen myself before. It's helping me to witness myself in ways I had not witnessed in myself before. And I think, particularly as a gay man, Seth, I think being queer, we just see ourselves on the outside of things, or we don't belong, or we're told we don't belong, or we're told we're, somehow outside of creation, is kind of the message we get. And astrology was like, no, you are perfect. Here is the symbol of your perfection within this universe. Here is the symbol of your necessary, meaningful contribution to the cosmos and why you're here. And that ability to feel seen healed me on ways I could never have imagined. And I wanted to, again, learn how to do that for others. And so astrology I think it's probably how I'm more well known for people who are following me more recently in my work. But it's the most recent addition to it. And it's one tool of many I use to help people feel seen and to understand that they are a contributing member of an ordered cosmos and they have a reason for being here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just happens to be the tool I use to do it. So that's kind of my story on my way to it.
Awesome. Yes. And this really plays into what my audience is here to hear more about, which is living an authentic lifestyle. Because
Yeah,
when we understand more about the truth of ourselves, when we're able to really see ourselves and be able to see the stories that we've been told of this is who you are, this is who you're supposed to be, this is what you're supposed to do with your life. And we can kind of separate that from how we actually knew ourselves to be before we received all of that external social programming.
exactly.
This is the path to an authentic lifestyle. And I find for a lot of people their route towards living authentically is reacting to whatever feels good in the moment, what feels right in the moment, and that's like them being authentic. But really, what it's all about is being able to step back from these stories that we've accepted as being true about ourselves, and being able to see the real us again, the us that we
Exactly.
knew before we received all of that programming. And yeah, I find it really fascinating to. I listen to your videos all the time about these transits and everything that you do. Why don't you explain that to people? Because this is sometimes when I'm listening to you, I'm kind of like, how does he keep track of all of this stuff in his head? There's so much information. So maybe explain to people like what transits are and how you use them to help people.
So transits are in astrology, what we're talking about with transits is the movement of the planets in the sky. And it can mean a couple things, but when I'm doing those updates on Instagram, I do every week. What it means is the movement of the planets in the sky and their relationship to each other by geometric angle. And different angles and different combinations of planets mean different things. We've associated different meanings with those configurations. But it really is to me like doing a weather report. It's doing a sort of like, here is, 60% chance of this on this day and a 40% chance of this on this day. And it provides a sort of energetic container for the experience that we're having. Now we can, Seth, interact with that container however we want. For instance, like last weekend, my partner and I went up to Rockport, Massachusetts. It's this beautiful little idyllic coastal town. We went up for a chamber music festival, and it was wonderful. And it rained. And those are the types of towns where if it's sunny, you can be outside, you can go to the beach, or whatever. But we had a fantastic time. We can interact with the rain in any way we want. We could sit in our hotel room and mope, or we went out to art galleries. We went out to, see concerts. We went out to fantastic restaurants. We went and like saw museums. We enjoyed like driving around coastal Massachusetts while it's, kind of rainy and cozy and like enjoying that. And so astrology is a little bit like that. Like there are some days astrologically, the energetic weather is rainy weather, but you can interact with the rain however you want. You can interact with the sun however you want. And the ancients were very good at correlating the planetary movements and the angles they were making with each other with sort of not only meta ideas of what are happening to us collectively on the planet or what we might be experiencing in the themes collectively, but then whittling it down and how does my individual soul experience those ideas? Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned a really important thing here. And I talk about this several times on this podcast, but maybe it's interesting to hear it from a different perspective. This idea of a container. So I've always talked about containers when it comes to like purpose.
Yep.
So for instance, when we talk about our passions, it's the what. When we talk about purpose, it's the why. And the why is the container, the passion is what we put into it. And as long as we kind of understand what the container is, then we can sort of evolve what we put into it and how we put into it and how we interact with the container. And so I find this really interesting. How do you see this concept playing out as far as in with astrology and how people interact with astrology? I know, like for instance, this year from what I've heard in your videos, there have been a lot of really big emotional weather forecasts that have occurred.
Yeah, yeah.
And so helping people to sort of navigate these these forecasts, these containers in a way where it's like, okay, so this is the container, but this is how I'm experiencing it, but I have some power here as far as how I'm going to experience this container, how I'm going to pour myself into it, what I'm going to put into it, and therefore what I'm going to get back out of it.
So that's a really amazing question. I should preface it by saying I'm not a stoic, nor am I a deterministic astrologer, and I don't agree with it. And I think that there are a lot of astrologers who subscribe to that belief system. I just don't happen to do that. I don't think we just have to sit back and allow things to happen. I always encourage people to hold their power, especially when they're doing work like this, because it's very easy to give it away to what someone says is going to happen to them. The transits form. All right, so let's keep using the analogy of the weather, right? So your attitude, your approach, your willingness to accept things as they are all come into play here, right? So when we're up in Rockport, we can sit around and mope, complain, be victims of the rain that weekend, or we can find proactive, solution-oriented ideas that can help us still have an amazing time. And also, Seth, maybe also open us to things we never would have done before, right? So when we're facing a container for transits, like let's say, April 20th through about May 5th was an extremely emotional, volatile, very, very dark emotional space that was coming up in a lot of people. I won't go into the technicals of it, but let's just use that as the meta weather, right? That's kind of what's going on around it. Now, you can react to those dark emotions and, cuss out your spouse. You can get mired down in them and try to mask them with something, some behavior, whatever, substance, whatever. You can realize that there's some tough stuff there that needs to be addressed. You can work on it with a coach or a therapist, or find some online resources that you can use that can help you work through it. There's infinite ways you can interact with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's our power is in how we interact with these ideas. And then recognize always that, to my belief system, the universe is always on our side.
Mm-hmm.
The greater weather is always on our side. It is never there to victimize us. It is never there to say, like, stupid you, why aren't you getting this? Why aren't you understanding it? Or you just have to take some sort of karmic punishment, or whatever. It's saying, here's the opportunity. And sometimes the opportunity is a shadow opportunity. You're looking at some deeper, more hidden spaces in yourself that may have been running your life without you realizing it for a long time. And the opportunity is to excavate that. But we always have free will in terms of how we interact with the general weather of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. This brings up a question that I've sort of had, and perhaps answering it is also helpful for other people.
Mm.
So, in terms of our emotional experience of life,
Yeah.
I always see, I've always believed in astrology as far as my understanding of it and exactly how it impacts us and why has always been a little bit vague to me. But my understanding is, there's nothing new in this universe. Everything
Right.
that's in this universe has been here since the dawn of time. It's
Right.
just taken
Right.
different representations. So the atoms that I am made of are stardust that has existed since millions of years ago when the universe first started creating itself, however you want to believe that that occurred, which means that obviously I'm connected to what's going on everywhere in the universe in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I think about our lives, our individual lives as human beings on this planet, we have our emotional experiences. And how I work with my clients is understanding that our emotional experiences aren't necessarily about what is happening around us. It's our
Right.
interpretation, our story about what's happening around us, which has to do a lot with stories that we accepted when we were much younger about life and about ourselves. But then this also begs the question, how much of our emotional experience also stems from energies that are occurring in the planets, in the stars around us that have nothing to do with the story that we've experienced and perceived in maybe this life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of something that I've always kind of wondered about. Like how much of my emotional experience is about my stories about life, and how much of my emotional experience is being impacted by the energy of stars, planets, and how things are moving. Do you understand the question that I'm asking?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I do. There's, there's in there's our individualized consciousness, and then there's the sort of greater consciousness around us, but we're part of that greater system. We're a part of it. Let's just say we're part of it. And so let's say the sunshine and the rain is the greater experience, right? There's a weather front moving through, right? Um, our stories about rain or how rain has affected us before, right? If I was in a serious traumatic situation while it was raining, I'm going to associate my stories will be very different about that rain than somebody who, met their, had got, I don't know, had their first kiss in the rain and it was a wonderful experience. They're going to associate something very different. They're going to tell a different story about the rain. That always comes to me about how our individualized experience is sort of existing within this bigger container, right? But we are always telling ourselves, and I think it should be clear here when I say free will, there are choices that we have that are easier to make than others based on what's happened to us. There are grooves that we've been in for a very long time, lifetimes sometimes, that are not easy to move ourselves out of in terms of our relationship to what's going on, right? We may have had a really serious traumatic incident that involved rain, and I'm using rain as a symbol here. It could be anything, right? But that we are terrified of it for a very, very long time, maybe even lifetimes. And so I think the question always is to me, first of all, what's happening? What's happening? What is really happening here? Okay, I'm having this experience of not liking this feeling that's coming up. I don't like this feeling of fear. For me, I had panic stuff for a long time. So I don't like this feeling of panic. Okay, this feeling of panic is here. Okay. Now, I can relate to that feeling of panic saying, "Oh my God, I'm having panic again," and feed on it, right? Which just continues to feed and makes the panic worse. Or I can say, this feeling of panic is here. There's a lot of fast moving energy today. I know there's a lot of, in the transit, there's a lot of fast moving energy today. Because I'm feeling panic does not mean there's anything to feel panicked about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know in my environment right now, everything's fine. I'm just sitting in the house with the cat, right? I'm fine, right? So I can know that there's energy out there today. There's experience on a bigger level that feels fast moving that I can interpret as panic or reminds me of a time I felt panic. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything for me to necessarily feel panicked about. And I can begin to soothe myself from that. Does that answer your question? I feel like that's how I would approach it
Yeah,
with,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
So
with
it's
my,
so we're receiving energy. It's kind of like what I tell people when we are experiencing big emotions and it's coming from subconscious stories, trauma that we experienced when we were kids, is what I'm hearing you saying is similar to what I teach. So it's about allowing the energy to be present, and instead of making it something wrong or bad, can I give it
right.
space and just allow it to be there and still show up for myself and what it is that I'm here to create in this day, in this time, in this chapter of my life, whatever it might be.
Right. Can I tell myself? Can I be aware? So one of the most helpful things about knowing the astrological weather, right, the transits, is first of all, you're not alone. We're all going through a similar thing and experiencing it in different ways. Some of us are more aware of it than others, and really it doesn't matter if you are or not, you're gonna be going through it with everybody as a collective. So we're not alone. And that when I know that, I can say, oh, Mars is square to Uranus today, or there's an eclipse ruled by Mars in Cancer, right? So as I'm using these technical terms, but what I'm saying is I know the energy, I know the sort of meta thing that's going to come up around that, right? Those eclipses we had in April and May, like deep emotional processing, going back into the old stuff, clearing out. I had a dream during that time of cleaning out my laundry room with a Q-tip. right? It was like scraping the real old gunk that I was ready to let go of out. You know, there was a representation my abstract consciousness created around it. And so I knew at that time, I said, okay, first of all, this isn't personal. Second of all, it's an opportunity. I can approach it as a time to clear out, you know, some significant stuff that had happened to me in my past, you know, and so many of us have gone through some really significant and powerful stuff. And then I interact with it in a way where I don't cause myself and other people as much suffering. Because I could easily make that emotional processing about the people around me. They did this, they said this, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't said all the things. But I know when I'm in those bigger containers, I'm like, I know what's going on. Therefore, I don't have to make it so personal and I can see it as an opportunity. And that's what I always encourage my clients. I'm like, the opportunity here is this. And it's not always easy, Seth. I'm not trying to make this is always an easy thing to do. And they're not always easy, quote unquote, lessons that come up for us. But it's always in the furthering of our understanding and the growth of our greater soul. It's always in the furtherance of that growth and understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the approach that I've been granted. I don't always know what's going on astrologically, but the approach that I've always been taking is when I notice there's a lot of big energy going on around me, is looking for the opportunity. What is the opportunity to learn something here and become more of who I know I'm here to show up as, versus using it as a reason to become fearful and back away and shrink down into my life and hide because I don't understand what's going on around me.
The most fundamental statement we can always make is this is happening. Whatever it is it's happening. This event, this thing, this feeling, this is happening. In Buddhism, you know, the Buddha's teachings are all about your relationship to what's happening. The weather, astrologically, meteorologically, it's happening. What do I do in relationship to it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, and again, I think it's really important to say, and one of the things an astrology reading and the chart can show you is, and you know this from the work, you know, the work you do, there are certain patterns that are very deeply ingrained and they're very subsurface, and we don't see them a lot of times. It's often helpful to work with a coach, a therapist, a teacher, because they see around the blind spot. They see the motivation for why you might have that. They see, you know, something. A lot of times for me, it was going to a therapist and him seeing, and I'd seen too, both of them seeing, him and her seeing the traumatic things that had happened that I didn't even know were trauma. The things that had happened to me that were so normalized that I didn't even realize were really serious things that had happened and that had caused me to act in my adult life in ways that were really against my best interests and also against the best interests of others.
Yeah.
And so, and those patterns, I don't want to ever minimize the challenge of those patterns and to go against them, because when we go against those patterns, we come up against the feeling we've been avoiding or the truth we've been avoiding. When we stop doing the thing that avoids those energies, so to speak, we come right up against them. And you need to sort of fortify yourself to be able to come up against that. But there's always healing on the other side of it. That's what I've discovered. There's always a breakthrough and there's always a flourishing in some area of life once you move past it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to circle back to, and here in just a minute, I want to talk about some of the big energies and transits that have happened this year, because I feel like for some people, it might help them to understand, like, you're not crazy. There was some shit going on in the universe this year.
Sure.
But before we go there, there's something that I would like to hear you kind of speak on, because it's an area, well, I think it's a tendency that we have as humans. It's like this idea of, I don't know if I want to call it predestination or predetermined, whatever. So when people start thinking about astrology and they think about what's my sign and they think about their chart or whatever, it's kind of, I hear so many people, the way that they talk about this is almost like, oh, well, I'm just destined to always be this way. I will always experience this life this way. And I don't know. For me, it's always, every time I hear someone tell me about anything in my chart, in my astrology, and my sign, whatnot, I've always sort of taken it as, okay, so this is what I have to work with. This is what I want to do with my life. So how do I make this work for me?
Right.
And how would you speak to that as far as to people that kind of see they find out, oh, well, I'm an Aries with such and such in my moon and in this house and blah 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 blah. So I will always experience life this way.
This is, and this question and this discussion has been going on for thousands of years, between free will and predetermination, right? This was a big meta-philosophical discussion, and it comes up with astrology point blank because there are certain things in the chart. Because of the way your chart is configured and the way the transiting planets move through the chart, they activate them by angle in a certain time, by what we call aspect, but sort of geometric angle in different ways over the course of our lives. And so there are certain what I think of. Well, let me answer your question more directly first. There's a saying in modern spirituality that you're the totality of possibilities, and the totality of possibilities are available to you. That is true, but you don't want the totality of possibilities. There are specific things that we are sort of imprinted to desire and want, be congruent with, learn, and experience that really light us up. And it's not just about us being happy. It's about us feeling fulfilled and joyful. What you might say being connected to your authentic life, right? That in a sense is fate, right? That's a fate. And when we're not on that course, we know it. Life doesn't work. We're miserable. Things, shit goes wrong, all that sort of stuff, right? And I think there's a part of us as human beings that rails against the idea that there's any kind of predetermination because we feel like we're sort of being punished or we're being constrained. And the nature of our soul, the nature of our consciousness is absolute freedom. So we rail against that idea. But we also, in some way, shape, or form, even if we say everything is random and it's only chance, we want some kind of guiding principle for being here. It can't just, we want something that sort of constrains us a little bit because we want to know where the railroad tracks are taking us. And so I think fate has gotten a very shame-based idea, sort of treatment over the last 2,000 years or so. Like, you're fated to do this. And it always comes with like, you've done something wrong. You're bad. You screwed this up in a past life, or you didn't do this commandment, or whatever it is. It always has an air of that to it. And so you're fated to experience this. It's like, no, absolutely not. You have certain touch points in your chart during your lifetime where certain things are more likely to happen in terms of the energy is ripe for it. But you can interact with it in any way you want. And it's all guiding you back towards your authenticity, so to speak, as you would say. It's all guiding you back to what you really want. I mean, all right, let me put it this way. I have been in relationships in my early life that were not authentic. And they blew apart. Some of them fantastically blew apart. There were certain transits that were happening at that time that helped me to blow them apart. And if I didn't, it was just going to be more stress, more misery. And for both my partner and myself, it wasn't working for either one of us, right? That was me acting inauthentically and off path from my quote unquote predestination, right? Your predestination is not taking you somewhere bad. I was off course from it, and it was course correcting me. And so now I'm in a space where my relationships, not only romantic, but my friendships function much better because I listened to the information that was coming to me. It wasn't to punish me. It was to guide me. It wasn't to make my life hard. It was to help me see what I'm doing that may be causing this, or things that I may not have done that weren't my fault that were causing me to choose these ideas, and then how to heal them and move through them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
this kind of sounds like also one of the things that I always talk about, and of course I word this very differently, is explaining to people the difference between like what I feel like doing, what I have the urge to do, versus what I truly want. And
Exactly.
we can look at almost, from what I'm understanding from what you're saying, because of how we were born, where we were born, and what time, and so therefore how we will intersect with the stars, the universe, everything.
Yeah.
It does in a way predetermine what we will be sensitive to, what we will look for in life and feel fulfilled by and aligned with. And those to me are our true desires. Those are the things that we are designed to thrive in. When we're in alignment with them, that's when we feel that like life is clicking around us, everything feels fulfilling, and we feel like
Right.
we're living in that purpose. And then there's the things that we do because fear comes up, shame comes up, guilt comes up, this feeling of not enoughness, not worthy, and that comes up. And so in the moment, it's like our true desire looks terrifying to us. And it almost feels
Right.
like a punishment. It's, to some of us, we might even view it as like some sort of punishment that we're like fated to feel sensitive to this thing and want this thing in our life. And we resist it. And we almost maybe even sometimes convince ourselves that we don't want it. And so
That's
we
right.
we chase we
That's
chase
right.
these urges, we chase these, this is what I feel like doing in the moment. And then we create, like you said, we create all of this suffering, unneeded suffering in our life for ourselves and for everybody that we're interacting with around us.
And it's very logical that we make those choices because we're trying to avoid pain. We're in pain and we want the pain to stop. And we
Yeah.
think the answer to the pain is, you know, so many of us as gay men, the answer is sex, right? Or the answer is whatever it is, like, and it can be anything. It doesn't have to be a substance or sex or gambling or anything like that. It could be, the answer is, a Netflix binge. The answer is, getting pissed off at somebody and externalizing this out to, whatever. Because we want the pain to stop. We're logical beings. We don't do things because we're irrational. And what happens is, for a little while, the pain does stop from that. For a
Mhm.
little while, it's satiated in some small degree, but the pre-existing energy still exists. And as you're saying, Seth, what I really want still exists. It never goes away. The chart shows that. It shows there are certain things you're going to be predisposed to desire and want. But like maybe I experienced when I was a kid, there could be a configuration in the chart of the planet Neptune with your moon or with the sun in a certain configuration. Lots of usually indicates many things, not all bad, but can indicate a real sense of disappointment and really profound disappointment. Mom or dad let me down in some way, or I felt very disappointed by something. So I can't let myself want that. Whatever it is, I won't let myself want a really wonderful relationship or a really wonderful job money because I'm destined to be disappointed. That imprinted thought, which is not true, can be indicated as a possibility of how someone might cope to those events, right? And therefore, I would say to the client is, there's a real complicated relationship to disappointment here. You're afraid of being disappointed, but what are you really looking for? Do you really want this that you have? Is it fulfilling you on a long-term level, or are you looking for something more fulfilling you're not allowing yourself to want? Because the fear is when I want it, I have to reckon with that disappointment. I have to reckon with that feeling of I idealized my dad or I idealized my mom, and oh shit, I found out they were a fucking human being and they really let me down in a big way. I have to reckon with that again. And that's one example. It doesn't always have to be psychological from childhood, but those sorts of ideas are what might come up with that.
Yeah. 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 I can, yeah, definitely see this. And I feel like, fear plays into this so much with so many people as far as
Yeah.
our patterns in life, even when we get in these patterns of resisting our true desires, and resisting what it is that would actually bring us fulfillment, and then we resist it out of these fears of stories that we have of this is going to keep playing out, this is going to keep happening because it happened one time, because we allowed it to happen in the past before we were aware of the fact that we had any sort of choice over doing something different.
Absolutely. And that a lot of what happened to us, especially as our kids, it wasn't anything to do with us and it wasn't our fault. We didn't have any control over it. So of course we create these really quite ingenious mechanisms for helping us not feel overwhelming emotion. And, from astrology and from Buddhism, we can carry those patterns in even from past lives. They can be something we something that happened to us that we just reacted to in a way and it got what I call a groove going. It's just, or it got a sort of wheel spinning in one direction. We just kept spinning in that direction. And it seems to work. And for the short term, it works. But for our ultimate fulfillment, it's about recognizing there's something here that I need to acknowledge I'm feeling or noticing or happen on a bigger level. And that's not always, sometimes that is something that you need a coach or a therapist or someone to walk you through. I mean, we don't always know what that's on the surface, but on the other side of the thing we've been running from our entire lives is our freedom. On the other side, it's so funny. We're running away from our monsters, Seth. And the monsters are running with the keys, saying, "We got the keys, man. We got the keys right here. We got the
Yeah.
keys for you. We're like, we're not trying to hurt you,
Yeah.
and but it also is compassion for ourselves. It makes sense. We do all these things because we're in pain and we want the pain to stop.
Yeah.
Well, that's the basic behind it,
Yeah. And one part of the work that I do with my clients is recognizing that, well, first of all, the difference between pain and suffering, and that a lot of the
Exactly.
suffering that we feel around this has to do with stories that we've accepted about life from parents,
Right.
grandparents, teachers, whoever, that we should feel ashamed of our experience, that somehow our experience is fundamentally wrong, and that
Right.
therefore we have to judge it when it comes up. We're not allowed to look at it. When it comes up, we dismiss it out of fear. We
That's
dismiss it
right.
out of
That's right.
disgust. We
Right.
dismiss it out of guilt. And, really getting people to be present with an emotional experience that they are so used to when it comes up, being like, oh my God, that's so stupid, and like push it aside, or like, oh, I know I shouldn't be feeling this right now. And I'm like, no, 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 no,
Oh,
no, 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 feel it. Like, what's this about? Let's look at it. Let's not push it away. Let's not shove it in the corner. Let's not tell it to shut up and sit down. Let's not tell it it's not welcome here.
that's right. Yeah.
Let's give it a seat on the couch and hear it out. It's here to help you with something. And until we listen, we're not going to know what that thing is.
Right.
And like you said earlier, you mentioned this earlier, we're very logical beings. We're also biological beings. We
Right.
have we have urges programmed in the brain that exists in our head, that is a tool for us, that when we don't understand those urges, when we don't understand the need that it thinks that it's fulfilling for us, then we can get very confused, very angry, very frustrated, and feel a lot of shame and guilt around those urges, instead of being like, this is an opportunity for me to meet a need and meet it in a constructive way that helps me to show up more as the
Right.
person that I want to show up as. And I find this to be a really interesting area to look at with people. And for a lot of people, it's very cathartic for them, because they're finally able to look at thought processes, look at emotional experiences about life that they've shoved down, shoved aside, told to shut
Yeah.
up for so much of
Yeah.
their life.
Yeah. And, the strategy for, um, what the chart's really helpful with too is it shows the probable way that you will cope, and the strategy you create to not feel whatever that was. And it's a lot of times shows it shows the early environment. It shows a lot of things. It's really interesting how that will come about. But it's that idea of, the chart will also show usually what you're really wanting. So let me give an example from astrology. And again, this might sound technical to people. Don't worry, but if you don't understand the technicals of it, I'll try to explain the whole interaction. Let's say the planet Venus and Pluto have a what we would call a friction-based or tense relationship in the chart. There's a lot of ways that would come about, but they have a tense relationship. Now, that often indicates, in its most fundamental space, someone who needs very deeply connected emotional relationships. They need a real sense that I'm not just in a partnership with this person, we are fundamentally very deeply emotionally connected. That can be very, very healthy, right? To have like a wonderful, not passionate and very secure, deep emotional connection with someone. Not everybody needs that. So people need different things, and that can show in the chart with their relationships. What that can also turn into is power dynamics that are unhealthy. And it's on the flip side, it can turn into domination and control, tumultuousness. It can turn into in its very shadow sense, it can turn into abuse and violence, because there's a desire for an intensity,
Mm-hmm.
but that intensity is being looked for. You're trying to meet it in a way that you're maybe used to or fell into and didn't realize it, and it's not your fault or whatever. And what we're looking for there is, what I would say with the client, if that was coming up, is, we might be looking for an intense connection with somebody.
Mm.
Is it really the power struggle or the sort of different types of intense emotional, experiences you're getting from the power struggle, or is it like I really want an intense, beautiful connection? It can be both. It's
Mhm.
just in our history, in what's happened to us, or what people have said to us, or we experience, how we might, what astrologers say, work that dynamic. And it can, and there's no judgment about any. God knows I've worked them in different ways myself, but the search there is looking for an intensity of emotional connection, a feeling of really secure, intense emotional connection. And different charts denote different things about people want. Not everybody wants that. Venus can be in a relationship with Mars, that might be a very different thing, or Mercury is a very different thing of what they're looking for. Sometimes more cerebral relationship, sometimes more of a partnership or a practical relationship. And it's all about, is this helping and working for me? Am I treating myself well and loving myself in this connection? That sort of idea.
Yeah.
And having what I really desire, what I'm really looking for without harming myself or other people. That sort of idea.
Yes. 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 So why don't you tell people a little bit about you do several different kinds of readings for people, but you just brought
Yeah.
up one of them, these chart readings that you do for people.
Yeah.
Um, can you explain a little bit to everyone what that's about? Like why this is important for people to know and have done, and maybe to help them understand themselves a little bit more?
So I think most people come to me for a chart reading when they're in a moment of transition, even if they don't quite realize they're in it yet. They're confused about which way to go. They are up against a choice point, career, relationship, different things like that. And also, a lot of people come to me wanting to know their purpose. Similar, I think, that it comes to the work with you. Like they want to know, why am I here? What am I supposed? I know I'm not fulfilled doing X. Would Y make me happier? Right? Those sorts of ideas. But I think that the most fundamental benefit of an astrology or a chart reading is understanding yourself better, is understanding that there's nothing wrong with you. The removal of the shame of like, oh, why do I was like, because this happens to be here and you're not destined to do it forever. We're just going to turn the jewel and it will be different as you do. We can work that same combination of energy in a very different way. And to understand yourself, your tendencies, to be able to see yourself more clearly, and therefore also know if I'm doing a good reading, it's more of a confirmation of what somebody already knows on a deep level that gives them validation of like, yes, I've actually always wanted to do bird watching, but I never let myself because I live in the middle of Manhattan, like so, and I've always wanted to, or I've always wanted to do this type of thing, or I've always wanted to move towards being more of a healer and less of a sort of clerical work or whatever. It confirms something for you you already know. And that's how I know I've done a good reading. When someone says like, yeah, I've always thought that, or yeah, I've always felt that, or yeah, I've never put words to it that way. And it reconnects someone to something deep inside of them that has always been there.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows them to take action that they may not have wanted to take before because they feel like, oh yeah, that thing that really is there. And we can even look at timing about what, when that action might be appropriate or might be harder or whatever. But it's not about sort of pulling out of the ether some sort of crystal ball and saying like, oh, you're going to do this or this is going to happen. It's saying like, here is what your soul came to do or wants to do, or this is what I see. And you already know this.
Yeah.
It's not a mystery. It's not like, oh, you reveal something. It's like, oh, yeah. And that's how I know I'm doing a good reading is when someone's saying, yeah, I've kind of felt that. Yeah, I've kind of known that. Yes, this is what's going on around me right now. I'm like, fantastic. It's just providing validation that you are in an ordered space, ordered cosmos. And it's taking you where you need to go. And we can just work on the tweaks about with the lefts and the rights that take you to more things that are healthy for you and that you want. Those sorts of ideas.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Really cool. So yeah, guys, if you're interested in having a chart reading done for you, then at the end of this episode, I'm going to have Alex give me all of the details of how you guys can get a hold of him and book one of these readings because he's really great. And also, I need your Instagram. Well, no, I know your Instagram handle. I'm going to put that in the show notes as well, so that you guys can start following him on there. You do these transit readings weekly, don't you?
Weekly. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
actually after we do this, I'm gonna do one. I do them on Tuesdays around midday East Coast time, Tuesdays.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why don't you, if you have a little bit of time, we still
I
have,
do. I got
okay.
plenty of time.
Why don't you talk about some of the big transits that happened this year, especially the one that you were talking about that happened in April? Because, you're not the first astrologer that I've heard talking about this transit that happened in April. And I think so many of us felt it and were so confused by it because it was like this year we were anticipating all of these great growth energies kind of coming in. And then April came around and it was like this deep, dark depression that was so confusing. I got worried. I almost was like, do I need to go see my doctor? And like,
Yeah.
am I becoming clinically depressed? Like something is off in my head and I don't understand what's going on. Like it got real dark there for a little while. And
Yeah.
I think I heard this from so many people that it wasn't just me. Like so many people were talking about how they were feeling really down about their life and confused about what was going on and why were they feeling this way about their life when they were doing all of this to try and grow and change their life. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
I would say that the dark space that we went into is part of the growth. It feels like we're going backwards, but it's part of the growth. So I'm going to try to not be too technical here, so you can stop me if it gets too technical. So basically, what we had in April were two eclipses ruled by Mars. So one was at the very tail end of the sign of Aries, 29 degrees of Aries. That was the solar eclipse that began the cycle. And then we had a very powerful lunar eclipse in Scorpio, which is also ruled by Mars. Aries and Scorpio both are Mars' signs. And that was May 5th at 14 degrees of Scorpio. So what that speaks to, because of the position of Mars at that time, which informs how we're going to experience those eclipses, it speaks to often the things we're trying to protect from the past that we need to not protect anymore. It speaks to, especially in Scorpio, things that have rotted metaphorically within us. Scorpio, its function symbolically is to break down old matter into new regenerative life-giving material. But in order to do that, we got to be aware of what's already rotted, what's no longer serving us, what's no longer applicable to who we're becoming. And all of us, as we make a transitional growth, as we have a sort of transition growth spurt, so to speak, as we're moving forward, there's certain things within our psyche, whether they're energies, coping mechanisms, strategies, whatever it is, that are no longer congruent with where we're going. And they have to be jettisoned and released. But we have to see them in order for that to happen. Scorpio, I can't tell you the number of trauma therapists I've had who come to my practice who have strong Scorpio in their chart. It's not afraid of the dark. It's not afraid of the dark spaces. It's not afraid of somebody else's dark spaces. It's not afraid of the darkest spaces of the whole human existence. And as we go into those spaces, we clear them out, so to speak. It's like I grew up on Cape Cod here in Massachusetts, and there are buildings that are built out into the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's from the shore, and they have these pilings that every so often have to be replaced, otherwise the building collapses, right? That's what Scorpio's its job is, to go in there, pull out the rotted wood, and put in something that's stronger, right? But that's a hard process, and it's very uncomfortable when those ideas are brought up. Also, those eclipses in that time speak sometimes of just being in a darker space of the human psyche, and we're all born with light and dark. We're all born with the ability to experience great joy and great sadness. And that is a time where it might be, like you said, like there's some really serious stuff that gets brought into consciousness, and we need to see a medical professional or a mental health professional. We need to see somebody who can help us walk through those spaces. But they're not aberrations necessarily in our experience, nor are we going backwards. And I think that's a big thing in the work that we do, Seth, is that there can be a sense of endless growth forward, which is endless brightening. Well, sometimes you go on a detour, or part of the growth is walking through a dark forest, so to speak, to get to the other side. The beginning of the Divine Comedy, I found myself in a dark wood and I didn't know the way out or the way forward. Those are parts of our growth experience, though I do completely understand they're uncomfortable. And I went through some of my own serious shit during that time too, of reckoning. So, yeah.
Yeah. I was having some very strange dreams going on, and noticing like there were some times when for instance, someone would ask me to do something that typically I would be so excited about, and like, oh yeah, let's do this. And I just found myself being like, I don't know. And like something about me was just kind of like not wanting to get excited about like these things anymore. And it started to worry me a little bit there. And I was like, something, it felt like a thick layer of sludge on top of me there for about a month or
That's it.
so.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, I started to worry about myself. I was like, am I getting depressed or what is going on here? Like, I just don't feel this very, I don't know. Normally, my energy is very expansive. It's very curious. It's very excited about like getting out and experiencing. And at that point in time, it was like pull back, and it
Yeah.
was very stagnant. But also, there was a whole lot going on internally. There was like, it felt like instead of expanding out, I was expanding very much in,
Yes.
and it was bringing a lot
Yes.
of stuff up that I hadn't looked at in a very long time. For instance, and I don't know if she listens to my podcast, so if she does, she might be pissed off about this. I haven't spoken with my sister in almost 7 years,
Wow.
and she started popping up in my dreams. And it was very interesting for me, some of the ways that she would just kind of show up in my dreams. And it brought up
Yeah.
some stories that I had that were just really interesting. That was kind of like, I never noticed that was there before.
That's right. That's Scorpio's job. That's the Scorpio. And Mars was in the sign of Cancer at this time. And the eclipse in Scorpio. Now, Aries is a fire sign, but it was ruled by Mars in a water sign. And Scorpio, where the second eclipse happened, is a water sign as well. Those are internal signs. They're very much about the inner experience. And water signs, tend to like have what I call the emotional secret garden, which is sort of a private emotional space that they don't share with they share with very few people, if anyone. They share a space. And so generally, when you have an eclipse, especially in Scorpio, particularly that sign, it speaks to much more of an internal idea of what's happening, and especially in the emotional realm. And with Scorpio, it's like undigested psychic material, undigested emotional material. And oftentimes that stuff arises in our dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was, I think for people who've gotten into astrology over the last few years, and a lot of people got into astrology over COVID, the lockdowns, because they were just watching a lot of YouTube and getting to know it. We went through, and I don't need to tell anybody this, and I know this will shock everybody, but there was an extremely unusual year in 2020. Let's just say it that way. Like the configurations in 2020 were like, and astrologers have been leading up to 2020 for years, right? You've been talking about this, basically a conjunction of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter in the sign of Capricorn. And then there was a Mars retrograde that affected those planets in very, very strong, powerful ways during the end of the year. That's very unusual that there's that level of intensity. It's like it's an 800-year type of transit, right? That sort of idea. And so I think that what I've been working with my clients are, because I think everybody has a little bit of astrological PTSD from that. There's a little bit of like, oh my God, like, is it always going to be this? It's like, no, but there are spurts of intensity even within the 2023, particularly, and going to 2024 is a little bit more of like there's the easy stuff and the challenging stuff, but it kind of swaps back and forth in a way. 2021 and 2022 were also difficult for a transit between Saturn and Uranus. And that had a lot of sort of hard edges to it too. But now we're sort of getting into this is a back and forth. But all this to say, Seth, is that the ancients saw time much more cyclically. We see it as a linear idea. We're going forward through time, right? They saw cycles, and that there are cycles of growth and there are cycles of rest. There are cycles of expansion. There are cycles of contraction. You see this in a lot of ancient thinking. You definitely see this in the Hindu tradition. You see the idea of Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the sustainer, Shiva, the destroyer, right? This is just part of how the universe cycles. There's endless cycles. And I think it's helpful when we feel like we want to go inward. It's like, this is just part of a cycle. I'm in an inwardly focused cycle. I'm in inwardly focused transits. I will go back to outwardly focused transits, but I think it's really important, especially in our culture, that we honor and recognize the receptive more archetypally feminine transits that bring us internal, that they're not holding us back. They're actually a way of us going forward, but we have to go through these cycles of expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. We go through them on big levels and small levels all the time.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes. So what can people look forward to in 2023 as far as are there any transits you see coming up that people might want to know about and be prepared for and maybe look forward to some opportunities?
The big transit coming up is Venus is going to retrograde in the sign of Leo. Give everybody exact dates for it. I always forget the exact dates. The retrograde begins on July 23rd and it ends on September 4th. And Venus retrogrades about once every 18 months. Retrogrades have to do with the position of the planet relative to the Earth and the Sun. And in the sign of Leo, this is very prominent. Leo is ruled by the sun. Leo tends to be extremely warm, generous, magnanimous, on display. There can, in the shadows, it can be theatrical in good or bad ways. It can be dramatic in good or bad ways. But Venus is retrograde in that sign, I think, is really interesting to look out for this summer, and especially in the relationship that it has to the planet Uranus and to Jupiter during this time. If you are holding yourself in the shadows of your own life, especially in your relationships to others. Now, Venus is often associated with romantic relationships, but it can be other relationships as well. You really want to look at over the summer how you hold your own sovereign power within your relationships and how you step outside of the shadows of your own psyche. In other words, where are you holding yourself back? Where are you not allowing yourself to be prominent because of maybe a fear of, things that have happened in relationships, maybe things that are happening in relationships, that you can review some of those ideas that may be holding you back so you can expand forward and allow yourself to be fully on display as your most sovereign self. Now, I would use that not necessarily authentic, but as your most sovereign self, is really being your own king or queen or sovereign in that sense. We're assisted by that as Venus makes this retrograde by some really innovative, out of the box, lightning strike type idea information that come to us around that. As Venus is square to Uranus through that 3 times. So Uranus tends to denote in this type of relationship to Venus that it's going to make the lightning flash of insight, like, oh, now I see why I do that. Now I see why I always hold myself in a small space. Now I see why I always give my power away to somebody else. Now I see it. Now I get it. There's a real potential here for like a sudden lightning flash of understanding. That's basically over the whole summer. That's the biggest transit of the year, I think, still coming up. There are some others. There's a Mars Cazimi happening in November, but I would say like that's the big one to look out for this summer.
Nice.
Where are you not allowing, and where is it okay to have a little healthy drama, like a little healthy fun, a little healthy like strut your peacock feathers a little bit, a little healthy like screw it, I'm acting from my most sovereign space. That sort of idea.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Exercising our human deciding power, I'm doing this. I'm doing this and I don't care that I hear all of the opinions, I hear all of the people doubting it. I'm stepping up because I have the power in my life to do this. Yeah. This sort of energy.
And the other thing I would really look for with this transit too is where have you had love withheld from you? Or where are you withholding love that you can allow yourself to be more generous and magnanimous with your own ability to love? And also, where can you recognize that where love was withheld from you in unhealthy ways was not your fault and you're allowed to receive love generously? That's a big one with Leo. Leo has to do with the heart, right? And so you think of the symbolism of the heart in exchange, right? Giving and taking, receiving, giving, receiving, giving, receiving, giving, even the physical heart doing the same thing, right? That receiving and giving. There can be a lot of ideas with the sign of Leo around withholding, and generosity. Stinginess or overgiving. Another one I would look for here too is like, are you in your relational style? Do you overgive? Do you feel you have to like flood people with amazingness in order to, compensate for a feeling of unworthiness? Those are themes that definitely can come up with Venus in the sign of Leo. That you as your sovereign self are enough, and you don't have to withhold in order to control love. And also, if people are withholding from you, you're worthy of people being generous with you too.
Yeah.
Those sorts of ideas. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I've had this sort of thought process that I've been working through recently over the last month that's come up, and it's an old trauma response for me from when I was a kid. Being a gay male growing up in a Christian home, I of course was hiding myself and created this environment to protect myself. But within that same environment, it also meant that I felt very unseen. And
Yeah.
because of this, I have a huge trauma around feeling ignored, feeling
Yeah.
like people aren't listening to me, people aren't paying attention to me, people don't think that I'm important enough to listen to. And
Yeah.
this sometimes leads me to start trying to push myself out a little bit more than I actually genuinely want to, because I'm trying to be like, hey, look at me, I'm over here, I'm
Yeah.
important, like begging for that attention. And I've caught myself within the last month
Mm-hmm.
starting to have that urge to do that again.
Yes.
Having that
Yes.
feeling coming back up where it's kind of like, I feel like I'm being ignored. I feel like I'm being told I'm not important enough to listen to, and having that urge to want to prove I'm important enough to listen to. And instead of falling right into that pattern of trying to get as loud and big as I could, it was very uncomfortable for me. I pulled back. I pulled back
Mm-hmm.
on my
Mm-hmm.
posting on
Mm-hmm.
social media.
Yep.
I was
Yep.
like, right now is not the time for me to do this because I'm doing it to try
Mm-hmm.
and prove my worth. And I get that my
Mm-hmm.
audience wants to hear from me right now, but right now what's important for
Mm-hmm.
me is to
Mm-hmm.
me to recognize and honor for myself. I'm important, I'm seen, I'm heard, and I'm not being
That's
ignored.
right. So Leo is ruled by the sun, right? The most prominent quote unquote planet in the sky, right? The ancient mind, they called all including the sun and moon, were called all planets. Now, prominence and my relationship to prominence, my belief that I am worthy of just being seen as I am. And I think, as gay men, of course, one of the biggest things, right, is our own, is it safe to be seen? Is it safe for my whole self to be seen? Is it safe for my whole, and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's really not, for us as queer people. But this, so this is really a great tangible example, Seth. I love this. The urge with Leo is to get more, a little more extra, a little more, put on more colors, whatever. But what I always tell people with Leo is Leos are often said to be, they're dramatic and theatrical. So they're thought to be very extroverted. They're often not, actually. Think of the Geminis tend to be the cocktail party, sort of sign. Gemini is a little bit more about connecting information, able to bop around between many different people. I am currently dating a Gemini, and I know this to be true. Like I can see it. Like he's able to like sort of connect around a lot of things and be out there, and like very easy for him, right? Leo is more about the sovereign, the idea of the king or the queen. The king or the queen sits on the throne. They don't go out necessarily, and this is symbolic, right? But they are seen. They are witnessed. They are noticed. They are prominent in that way. Sorry, my cat's having a total nutty right now.
Oh, good.
Um, but like they're noticed. And so they don't have to do anything for that. The job of Leo is to learn in this lifetime a lot of times how to simply exist and be seen as you are, to radiate from within you and
Mhm.
allow people to resonate and come to that rather than, but the tendency can be exactly as I have to be more extra. I have to do more of this. I have to have more colors. I have to have more, more noticeable. It's like you're noticeable. You are that. But those fears are all things that might be, this is a perfect example of like, no one's going to see or listen to me. No one's going to notice me. I'll be forgotten. I'll be, I don't matter. those, while very common human fears, might be things that are much more elevated to the surface at this time, and really reviewed over those 6 weeks from the end of July to the beginning of September when Venus is retrograde. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That makes a lot of sense then for me. That makes a lot of sense why this is coming up now. I've had this and I've been doing a lot of my journaling around it and talking about it with my husband and with my coach, and just kind of being like, I have this feeling coming back up again, and I can't really pinpoint where in my life what triggered it, but it's been coming up for the last month, is this almost panicky feeling of, I'm being ignored, get louder. Like, you've got to get louder or no one's going to hear you. Yeah.
Leo has to do also with the heart and with courage. It represents the lion, right? The constellation of Leo, for which the sign takes its name, is the lion, which represents courage. But I can assure you, having a cat of my own, cats do not need to get in your face to get it. They simply exist and expect the universe to exist around them and their needs and desires. Now, of course, as human beings, we won't be arrogant to that degree to do that, but there is a certain amount of healing that can come up when we have felt ignored, unseen, not noticed, not even, not being the main character of our own lives, but always being the best friend, so to speak, right? Where during a transit like this, we might come up against some of that existential pain that made us think that, right? We experience the pain of that directly. And then, like we were saying before, Seth, like, rather than telling the story, I don't matter, it's just being like, they couldn't see me. Other people do.
Yeah.
Rather the story of like, I have to get louder. It's like, it was never my job to make anybody love me. Right. It was always my job to be my own sovereign self and allow those who radiate towards what I have to come to me. That is this type of idea that might surface, arise, and move through over the course of the summer, and really complete by October, but it'll be strongest between the end of July and beginning of September.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've kept people on here for quite some time. Why don't you tell people the best places where they can find you? I'm going to link stuff in the show notes, but tell people how they can get a hold of you, where they can find you, and how you want them to get in touch with you.
So best way to find me is my website, www.alexamorosi.com. You can get information on all my services there. You can book readings with me there. You can have a contact page if you want to ask me more questions. This is probably the best way to contact me, is through there. You can go find my Instagram at Alex Amorosi Healing. I do weekly updates. I sometimes do kind of just kind of goofy, fun astrological content on there too, to teach. Those are probably my website's probably the best way to get a hold of me. And you can book all my services on there. And I have a whole range of different ideas and services that I have on my website too, that you can look at and book the one that feels most appropriate to you, or contact me and see which service would probably be best for you with what you're going through.
All right. Awesome. All right. So do you want to say goodbye to everyone? And I feel like we're going to need to have you on here a second time. There's still so much more to talk about here. So I feel like there's going to be another episode where you're coming on here again.
I'm back whenever you want me. It was a joy to be with you, Seth. This was a really fun conversation, and just thank you everybody for listening, and thank you for having me on.
All right, everyone. That was my conversation with Alex Amorosi, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I enjoyed having the conversation, and thank you, Alex, again for coming on and joining us. And I look forward to having him back again, because I feel like we touched on quite a few topics today. It was his first time on the podcast, and some of these topics I just kept thinking, oh my God, I want to go deeper in this, but I think we need to have that for another podcast episode. So you all can look forward to having him back on the podcast again in the near future. But I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I hope you all took something from it about living an authentic life, and also being able to understand that there is a difference between our predestination and our fate when it comes to what we are designed to feel fulfilled by, versus being trapped in something that we're stuck with in life. And I really hope that today You learned about being able to take what you are sensitive to and what you are designed to feel fulfilled by in life, and use that as a tool for your advantage to create the life of fulfillment that you truly want. So I look forward to having Alex on again, and I will talk to you all again here next week. Until then, ciao. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the content of this podcast. If you did, please subscribe so that you're one of the first people to know when I release a new episode each week. If you have any questions, or if you have interest in learning more about the coaching that I do with my clients one-on-one, then just head over to my website at www.lifecoachseth.com. That's www.lifecoachseth.com. There you're going to have the ability to reach out to me for questions that you might have, or to book your free discovery call with me to discuss what one-on-one coaching with me might be like for you. You can also check out and order your copy of my book to get a taste of what I'm all about as a person and as a coach. I'm so happy that you joined us today, and I hope to have you here again next week. So until then, let authenticity be the guide to your most unstoppable and fulfilling journey of life.